Before we shift to the questions, I wanted to share one or two things with you, and maybe David from RCC, RMCCN has some announcements as well. So maybe just two things from me. So one is that this evening is offered freely. It's a joy to get to spend the time together and talk about things that I care about with folks who are interested and share some of my values. And RMCCN and the Spiritual Unity Center of Denver and myself all are trying to survive in this day and age, as we all are. So we're very happy to offer this freely. And if you are in a position to offer a contribution or a donation, there's an open invitation to do so, and it would be greatly appreciated and welcome. And there's no obligation. We're living through really hard economic times. I don't want anyone to give in a way that will create harm for yourself. So if you have the capacity and the inclination to offer support for our work, both myself and both of the centers sponsoring this evening, all of the donations will be shared equally among us. And I think that maybe Paul or David can put the link, there it is in the chat box, and we'll remind you again at the end. So that's one. Two, if you would like to stay in touch, if you would like to practice and train together more with me, I would love that. I'm teaching a lot online these days, so very accessible. And my book is available. It's a great way to just learn more at your own pace. And I have a number of programs and retreats coming up online, and all of those can be found on my website. So I'm just going to put that link in the chat here. A couple of retreats in August coming up, both a meditation retreat as well as a mindful communication retreat at the end of August. And then in the fall, I have a 12-week online class that goes through my book one step at a time, one chapter at a time. We meet every week. And so it's a really great opportunity to dig in a little bit deeper and learn some more. So all that information will be on my website in the link there in the chat. So I'm going to turn it over to you, David. Any announcements you want to make?
As you were talking, Oren, I was thinking of one of my heroes and profound influences on me, who was Joseph Campbell. And he said, if you want to change the world, change the metaphor. And so the whole thing about the giving economy and the economic upheaval that we're in, often the metaphor for economics is it's a jungle out there where it's hostile and everyone's fighting and the fittest survives and all of that. But what if we thought of the economy as a garden, something that we cultivate, we selectively weed, we fertilize it, and that money, just like sunlight, is the nutrient coming down from the solar fire, from the thermonuclear furnace in the sky, and it's captured by the plankton in the sea, the leaves in the plants, and that's the foundation of the food chain. And that's how we live in the physical world. And the economy also is all about working with sculpting the physical world. So what if we thought of money as a nutrient, just like sunlight, that delivers energy to us? So that's really the spirit, the economic spirit that we make our suggestion that you donate if you can, because it's a nutrient that helps us continue this work. The other thing I'd like to say a little bit is if the taping goes all right, we'll have a video of this that we can put on YouTube. We will let everyone who was on the call today know when it's available, send you the link. And so, Oren has a mailing list. The Rocky Mountain Compassionate Communication Network also has a mailing list. And since we're moving into the world of online classes, location is not as important as it used to be. One thing that we do that I'm very proud of and is very unique is we have open invitations to all sorts of trainers and facilitators. We have a community calendar, and it really does come from our community. There's maybe a dozen or 15 people that put stuff on there, everything from a 45-minute empathy call, to 12-week training. And we don't edit it. We really want to invite people to offer what's alive for them and have that aliveness be a contagion that spreads through others. So if you're interested, rmccn.org, and we'll give you an opportunity to be on our mailing list if you want to be totally voluntary. My inbox gets overloaded, especially lately, but we'll be doing a follow-up with that. And I just want to have, while I have the spotlight on me, I just really want to express gratitude. I'm just really grateful that Oren, I was so caught up, Oren, in your talking, and I'm just grateful to be present. And I love the way you talked about how precious time is, what a great gift it is. And my experience is when I hang out in the gratitude, I live in a world of wonder, of mystery, excitement, and adventure. And I'm sure feeling that right now. So I love to talk. I've talked enough. We're going to do the questions.
It seems like we already have one question in the chat, and would love to just maybe start there. And if you have other questions, go ahead and just write them in the chat, and we'll go from there. So, Paul, do you want to read Audrey's question, or I can read it too?
Why don't you read it, Paul, and then we'll have the back and forth of your voice and Oren's voice.
Yeah, Audrey said she could read it if we could take just a moment.
Sure, that's great. Yeah, we give Audrey a mic. And
Audrey, I've given you.
Paul, just so you know, there's some kind of weird echo when you speak. Hey, Audrey, you there?
Yeah. Hi, Oren. Hi, everybody. So I'm finding it really difficult to kind of balance between non-attachment to how I want a situation to be and not speaking violently. So like your story about being a meditator and complaining about the broccoli really resonated with me. And in my attempt to like let go of my feelings or kind of let the situation pass, I find that I end up kind of shutting down completely so I don't speak harmful words. And I would just kind of like recommendations on how I can get centered in these kind of situations instead of kind of zoning out. That's kind of feel how it goes.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you bring this up. It's kind of the one of the core questions, right, about this intersection of particularly Dharma, Buddhist meditation, and nonviolent communication, because the kind of one of the core ethoses, a core ethos in the Dharma, ethoses is attachment leads to suffering, right? So what does that mean, and how do we reconcile that with, well, I have feelings and needs? So I think there are just two main things I would want to say here, Audrey. Maybe one on maybe three. So on a theoretical level, I think it's important to have a clear sense of what's meant by this term non-attachment that comes out of Buddhism, because it's one of the more subtle concepts that's often misunderstood. I'm not suggesting that you're caught up in this, but since you brought the topic up, I want to maybe try to clarify it some. Without getting into too much technical stuff, I think a more accurate translation than attachment is control. In the NVC, we talk about it as demand energy. So it's this energy of needing to have things exactly the way we want them. So the subtlety is that what we're looking to discover in ourselves is this very kind of exquisite poise, really, in the heart between honoring our experience on the personal human level of our own feelings and our deeper needs, what's important to us, without that sense of control and demand. I have to have it this way. I need it to be this way. I'm going to come back to that in terms of, well, what about when safety is at stake? What about when I don't have enough food to eat, and that level of social issues? Speaking on an interpersonal level where we're not talking about kind of deeper physiological needs for sustenance and safety. How do I honor what's true for me without trying to control life, right? So that's the space we're looking to discover inside, and it's very subtle. So then the second thing to acknowledge is we each have tendencies here, often based on our socialization. Is our tendency to fall more to the side of it has to be this way and you're going to do it my way or else? Or is our tendency to fall into the side of, oh, it doesn't matter, forget about it, I'll just deal with it, right? So whichever side you tend to fall towards, and I think most of us have a tendency in one direction or the other. The tendency changes often based on the context and the relative power relationships. Go in the other direction. We're trying to develop more flexibility. So it's not going to be comfortable, and it's often not going to be pretty. So if my tendency as a white male is to always try to get my way and speak up and demand, then I'm going to want to practice stepping back, letting go, letting things be more. Not because that's what's the right thing to do necessarily in all situations, but because if I don't do that, I'm just acting out my habits and I have less choice and flexibility. And vice versa. If many of the female-identified students I work with have been conditioned to be self-effacing, to give up their own needs in the face of others. So the move there then is to step into your power more, to say, no, that's not okay. How do I own my needs? How do I speak up more? Not because that's always going to be the most skillful thing to do in every situation, but because if we don't stretch into that discomfort, we may never have the capacity to do that, and then we lose choice. So that's the second point. Go in the opposite direction of your conditioning to develop more capacity. Then the third thing is on a practical level, which I think is really starting to get to your question, how? How do I do that, right? How do I not just give up on my side? How do I not go into that demand energy? This is where being creative comes in. And there are many, many tools that we have at our disposal, from the tools of meditation and exploring internally what's really important to me. How am I relating to it? Can I give myself the space to feel my emotions, to rage a little bit, to get really angry, to be in that demand energy? Allow yourself to have that experience internally so that it's not running the show and you can bring it into balance. We have the tools of role playing and rehearsing. Get a friend, get an empathy buddy, and have the conversation in a role play and play around with the different energies so that you can start to get feedback and feel out what it might be. And then use your creativity to explore what would it be like to care about all of the needs present, not just mine. What would it be like to approach the situation from the angle of, I want this to work for you too, and here's what's important to me? Because I think one of the reasons we often abandon and give up our own needs is because we don't want to lose the relationship, we don't want the other person to feel obligated, and we have some care for their needs. So go ahead and actually front load the conversation or your approach by acknowledging, it's important to me that this works for you too, and I don't want to give up on what's important to me. That's the dynamic tension that we are learning to inhabit and live within in dialogue, is how to hold the whole range of needs that are present. Now, where this starts to get more complex and nuanced is when we start to bring in issues of power, issues of oppression, and history. So this is going to start to move into, I think, one of the next questions that's there. So I'll just speak a little bit about this, and then we can have Paul read the next question. But kind of a classic example is if I say something that lands as a microaggression for a person of color, right? And they give me some feedback, however it comes, that was kind of racist, that's effed up, I don't appreciate it. Okay, so they have a need to be seen for who they are, perhaps, a need for understanding, a need for acknowledgement. Now, I'm sitting here going, but that's not what I meant, right? So I have a need to be seen for my intention. So here are the needs that are present. Now the question is, on just an individual level, we might say, well, yeah, I really want to be seen, and also do you want to be seen, so let's work on that. Why can't we both be seen? So it's the privilege of living in the identity that's in the dominant group to see things from that individual level and say, yeah, your needs matter, my needs matter, let's get together and work this out. From the person who's occupying a more marginalized position in our society, and I have to give credit here to Roxanne Manning, a colleague and friend of mine who has taught me a tremendous amount about this. They're living in a world where they don't have the luxury of being seen as an individual all the time. They're seen through the lens of their identity, whether that's as a black person, as a gay person, as a woman, as a trans person. And they're carrying often a history in their own life, if not intergenerationally, of pain, of being seen in that way. So now when we look at the needs, there's some sense of, wow, this need for you has gone unmet for so long. Am I going to prioritize my own need for comfort and being seen at the same level as your need to be seen and understood and acknowledged and respected? So as we begin to shift our perspective and bring into our consciousness other layers, the relative valence of the needs starts to shift. This is a deeper practice of leading with presence. It recognizes that my awareness of the other person is not just on an individual level. I'm able to start to broaden my awareness to a wider context, a wider frame of context, and see more than just what's happening now. That's a kind of relational awareness on a deeper level. So there's so much more that could be said here, but I hope that that's helpful, Audrey, on a personal level. And I want to move on to the next question here in the interest of time. So, Paul, do you want to read the question from Susan?
Question will be David Schindall. David, you can unmute yourself.
Okay. My question has to do with your work around trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm having conversations with somebody around race and this person's experiences in his past. It just seems like if that's not addressed, somehow kind of profoundly heard, that we'll be kind of spinning around on the periphery of what's really true. And so I guess it's kind of a twofold question. Like, if this were kind of you sitting down with somebody in more kind of like a very intentional space of dealing with trauma, where you both have that intention, what is it that you do differently than just empathy? And then, how to deal with that when you're not, when that's not, necessarily shared intention, but you can kind of sense that there's some, and also from what this person has told me, you can sense that trauma. So
let me see if I'm just understanding the question, David. So you're asking, what would I do differently if the dialogue I'm having is with someone who either through naming it directly or based on my own observations, assumptions, information, I have a strong sense, is holding a certain amount of trauma. Mm-hmm. Is that the question?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm guessing that the second one would be answered by the first one, or responded.
Yeah. Well, there's a different context, right? When there's a shared mutual agreement, versus there isn't that kind of frame around the conversation. Obviously, the first one is more ideal. Well, So there's a few things. I'm just taking a moment here to just kind of consider and let my thoughts organize. So one of the hallmarks of trauma is that the nervous system gets stuck. There's some experience in the past that overwhelmed the person's physical, emotional, or psychic boundary. And that injury was never resolved. It was not completed on a physiological level. That boundary was not reasserted, healed, and integrated. Okay, this is one way of understanding trauma. And so what happens is that the patterning of that injury continues to surface and arise in the person's mind and body in an attempt to resolve, to heal itself, because the psyche wants to be integrated and the body wants to heal and the heart wants to heal. So trauma can be event-based, it can be more complex and developmental. So depending on the kind of trauma that one is working with, it can be more or less complicated. The danger of NVC-style empathy is that the person's nervous system may just kind of sink or down spiral into the woundedness rather than having the capacity to integrate the care and actually experience some healing and completion, because energetically the nervous system is in a rut. It keeps going down the same groove, and it requires a different kind of intervention for the nervous system to reset and develop a new pattern and move out of that groove. Okay, so this is just kind of a little bit of basic trauma theory around what's different than an ordinary NVC approach. The complicated part about this is there's something important about autonomy, where if someone's not coming to me personally and saying, hey, will you help me work on my trauma and heal it, I want to be really sensitive to not kind of stepping into some position of now directing things in a way. But obviously I still want to be sensitive and respectful of whatever that person's process is. So in the context of an intentional conversation, I think one of the things that I would be looking at is just from the get-go, asking the other person, do you have a sense of what would be most supportive from me? And find out from them, what can I do that would be supportive in this situation? And what have you learned that works to have this kind of a conversation in a way that's healing and supportive? Because I might have my own ideas, but you know yourself better. So that's one very concrete thing that I would want to be doing. The other thing is that in general, so one of my trauma healing teachers said, Kathy Kane, she said, your nervous system is your primary intervention. So human beings are relational creatures. We co-regulate, we influence each other. So when there is trauma in the room, one of the best things you can do to support that other person is to stay regulated. The more regulated, balanced, and oriented you are, not in some kind of controlling or trite way, in a very open, connected, and relational way, but if you're attending to your own reactions and your own emotions and whatever's coming up for you and trying to stay balanced and regulated, that has the potential to help their nervous system stay more balanced. And then within that, there are other things you can do to help support their nervous system to integrate what's happening and stay balanced. Generally, the most general thing I can say without going into more detail and training, given the time we have, is through your presence, your empathy, your reflection, to acknowledge and mirror back the aspects of whatever's happening individually or relationally that are healthy and healing. So whenever there's a moment of agreement, whenever there's a sense of completion, whenever there's some understanding, really letting yourself land there. Because the tendency of the trauma is to keep going into the woundedness. And part of the healing is being able to balance that with what's already whole. And so anything we can do to, like Carl Rogers said, to see the innate intelligence and wholeness of the person and to inhabit and reflect and connect with that, that's going to help to create the conditions, hopefully, for more integration. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Oren, do you want to hold really strictly to the 9 o'clock end time, or
I can go over a few minutes if other folks want to stay. It's fine. Okay. Let's take another question. I'd love it to be from someone who's not male identified, just for balance.
Yeah, this will be Susan Kaplan. And Susan, you can unmute yourself now.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Paul and David, for supporting the tech. That's always an added stress. Thanks for doing that. Oren, I'm supporting 2 organizations that are having kind of sides right now. And I'm a part of one, which is Center for Nonviolent Communication. And so the trainers list, as you know, has had this split between kind of the awareness, the consciousness of the collective versus more of an individual focus of MVC. And I'd just love to hear, if you were hired to come in and help us, what would you do? Like, what ideas would you bring to help us come to a place that's more towards each other rather than the splitting?
Yeah, say a little bit more. So I'm aware of some of the tensions and the split. I unfortunately don't have the bandwidth to follow it. But so tell me just a little bit more around, in particular, what it is you're trying to do and how you understand the nature of the disconnect.
My interpretation is that many people who knew Marshall are trying to keep Marshall's work intact in a certain way. And that's a way of integrity and honoring of the work. And there are others who are saying, no, wait a minute, some of that work has been used to actually oppress and harm people who have been marginalized. And so how do we broaden and create more inclusion by welcoming this consciousness?
I see.
And so
yeah,
the needs are different, but the strategies, no one can seem to come up with the strategies to...
I think for me, the place that I've always gone with this, Susan, is there's a couple of different places. One is, and I don't know if this conversation has happened or not, but there's something for me around like the deep commitment to this sense of like the integrity of nonviolent communication, or I've sometimes heard the word purity used, which is a loaded word for me. because it carries so many other connotations and contexts historically. But perhaps integrity is a more value-neutral word. The integrity of nonviolent communication and the system that Marshall Rosenberg created. I think for me, one of the keys there is, has there been conversation about the difference between the spirit and the form? And I heard Marshall Rosenberg say on more than one occasion, and pardon my French, you can say fuck you in NVC. And if the other person understands what you mean and it leads to more connection, then you're using NVC. He was very clear that it's not about the form. And he said over and over again, this is about creating a quality of connection that helps us work together to meet needs. It's not about what you say. It's not about, is this an observation or not? So for me, one of the things that I bring into my teaching is the difference between the technical and the functional definition of these terms. And I think that this is some of where the conflict is happening, is that, and again, this is from a very outside perspective. I haven't been following the debate closely, and it's possible some of this discussion has already happened, but my interpretation from what I see on the outside is that, like this argument about what is an observation and, is privilege an observation or is it a judgment? Well, it depends on the context and who you're talking to, because we can have an argument until we're blue in the face about, is this technically an observation or not? That's not what matters. What matters is, does the other person hear it as an observation? Do they experience it in leading to more connection and understanding? And so for me, that comes down to, who are you speaking to and what is your purpose? And so I think that to have this conversation without looking at the context and saying, well, if I'm using the word privilege, in what context and what's the purpose, is really essential for me. And it's about what function is this playing, rather than is this technically NVC or not. And again, the metric for me is this leading to more connection and understanding and allowing us to collaborate to meet needs? And I think that that's a place where possibly these two perspectives might be able to find common ground and hear each other, because I can see and imagine situations in which talking about privilege would not lead to connection and understanding. And I can see situations where not talking about privilege would lead to disconnection and a fracturing of understanding and alignment. So I think it depends a lot on the context and how is this received, and is it leading to the purpose of nonviolent communication, which is about the state of our consciousness, not about what we say. He was so clear, this is a practice of transforming your consciousness. And is it leading to a connection where, as Marshall used to say, the divine energy, I mean, he was super spiritual, right? The divine energy and creativity of the human heart can begin to express itself. So that would be one angle that I would take. I think the other angle here, and something that is harder to work towards, but which I wonder if it could be helpful, is those who are asserting that the integrity of NVC needs to be upheld, and using NVC in contexts around power and privilege and talking about these issues is somehow diluting the purity of NVC. There's a lot of that logic that is, for me, dripping with white supremacy. I don't think it's conscious. But the trope of the integrity of the founder is in and of itself a narrative that has been used, not necessarily intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, to oppress. And so there's a piece there around, is there space for education? Is there space to say, what if we put this whole argument down, step back, and just talk more about the history of oppression and white supremacy and what these terms mean, and what some of the other perspectives are, and try to, again, have mutual understanding so that we have a shared framework for some of the issues and content we're talking about when we get into how do we handle these issues, this history, these dynamics within the framework of nonviolent communication. That's another direction that I think could be interesting to explore.
Thank you. I love your presentation tonight.
Great.
Because white supremacy is part of me, and so that consciousness is part of what I'm holding to learn about and shift, so I can really connect with all people. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Great. How about Nancy next?
Sure, and maybe this can be the last one. I just want to respond to Claudia, to your comment there. What I said was dripping with white supremacy is not the NVC community. I mean, segments of it may be, because as Susan said, this is conditioning that we all internalize based on our culture. What I was referring to was the logic of preserving the integrity and purity of fill in the blank. That it's the same logic that's used to argue for keeping a Confederate flag, or the statue, and my political views are coming out here, I'm not going to hide them, the statue of a Confederate war hero in the South who was a proponent of slavery. It's saying we have to preserve the purity and integrity of our history. Okay, well, what about when that history is founded upon the murder and exploitation and oppression of black and brown human beings who were enslaved? Is that a purity and integrity we want to preserve? So that's the narrative and the logic that I'm saying is embedded in white supremacy, is that there's a myth that there was a time in history when everything was wonderful and pure that we need to maintain and get back to. So that was what I was speaking to. So sorry, I kind of jumped in. Someone else had a question.
So Oren, we have so I think we can whittle it down to Nancy, and then Corianne had something just really simple to ask. So I'll throw the thing in from Corianne. She asked if there was a community page or a Facebook page where people who are interested in practicing and discussing using NVC that you could recommend.
Oh yeah, great.
Then I'll send you to Nancy.
We can send out a follow-up email with some links. I'm drawing a blank right now beyond my own self-centered work. So I will continue to think about other resources that are out there. The one that I can offer is on my website, there is a link for a community forum, and I'm putting the link in the chat right now. It's community.orangesofer.com. And it's an open forum where anyone can join and have conversations, find empathy buddies. And then there are also private forums for the online classes I teach. But that's one that I'm aware of. As I said, there might be others, but I'm drawing a blank right now. So I'll think about it and we can send out some links. So last question from, was it Nancy?
Nancy.
Hi. So you might have answered my question. My question was based on when you were talking about when you are coming from this perspective and you are looking for the humanity in that other person. Mm-hmm. I was in a class with you the other night, and you were saying, I think it was you that said, do you want to be right or do you want to be free?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of stuck in that because I really think I'm right. The way I think about things. And I know that it's not helping me, but
yeah,
you know, I put in my question about, you know, people that are cruel and that are, you know, that are dangerous. How do I that humanity? And I had a friend that told me once, every single person is doing their absolute best at that time. And well, even Hitler, and he said, yep,
Yeah. Yeah, Mickey had there was a wonderful quote from Mickey on Twitter today or yesterday, something to the effect of, the tragic view of compassion is that all of us are doing our best to meet our needs, and that includes Adolf Hitler. That was the quote. So yeah, maybe you are right. The question is not, for me, the question is not, am I right or wrong? The question is a more pragmatic one, which is, what does thinking in that way lead to? To me, whenever I think I'm right, it does not help me see the other person more clearly or have an effective conversation. So it's not, for me, it's not so much a question of kind of metaphysically or epistemologically, who's right and who's wrong. Yeah, maybe. It's more a pragmatic question of what helps me create the kinds of relationships, the quality of connection, and the conditions for transformation and collaboration that I value. And so the invitation and the offer of nonviolent communication is to see life from a different perspective. And rather than evaluating our actions and behaviors and choices from the perspective of who's right and who's wrong, to see them through the lens of human needs and what needs are met and what needs are not met. So when I see others behaving in ways that I would characterize as cruel, it does not meet my needs for compassion, for dignity and respect, and for living in a world where all life is honored and where life is sacred. And for me, that's a position, that's an orientation that leaves more space for having a conversation and doesn't automatically put the person on the defensive. Because there's less to argue with. Because I'm talking about my values and my needs. I'm not making a judgment and saying, I'm making, this is what Marshall talked about, we're making value-based judgments rather than moralistic judgments. So right, wrong, good, bad is a moralistic judgment, which then leads to domination and punishment, justifying that. Whereas a values-based judgment, a needs-based judgment is saying these actions, these behaviors are not serving life in my estimation. And if you have a different estimation that they're serving life, let's talk about that, because that's something that I really want to get clear on. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's really a pleasure to spend the evening together, and I bow to your deep commitment to living in a way that contributes to peace. So thank you for that. Again, if you'd like to support my work and the work of these two centers that have sponsored this evening, and you have the capacity, you can make a donation at that link. And I hope to see you down the road, either virtually or in person.
I just say the link out loud because I made a very simple link on purpose. It's rmccn.org/foreign. And it'll take you right to a donation page. And I want to also thank David Howard, who initiated this whole process 1.5 years ago. He's the minister of the Unity Spiritual Center. I just want to thank everyone where we put our attention. When we put our attention on stuff like this, instead of, oh my God, the sky is falling, we're transforming. And so thank everyone for making the time to be here.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you, Paul. Take care, everyone. Be safe. Hope to see you again.